Folks always say the truth sets you free. Well, I'm here to tell you that sometimes the truth can tear your whole world apart. It can take everything you thought was solid and turn it to dust right before your eyes. That's what happened to me. And Lord knows, I never saw it coming. My name's Ruth, and I just turned 62 last spring. Up until about 6 months ago, I had what you might call a simple but blessed life. Nothing fancy, mind you, just a good, honest life with my Tom. We'd been married for nearly 30 years, living in the same little house where we raised our children. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and every corner held memories. Tom was a quiet man, gentle as could be. Every morning, I'd wake up early to fix his coffee just the way he liked it, strong enough to put hair on your chest with just a touch of sugar. He'd sit on our porch swing, watching the birds while I puttered around in the kitchen. Those quiet mornings were precious to me, though I didn't realize just how precious until they were gone. We weren't high school sweethearts or anything like that. I met Tom when I was already 45, after my first husband left me high and dry with 2 young ones to raise. Tom came into my life like a blessing, helping me pick up the pieces. He never had children of his own, but he loved mine like they were his flesh and blood. Our home wasn't anything special to look at, just a small place with worn furniture and faded curtains I'd made myself. But it was full of love. Tom tended his vegetable garden out back, and I'd cook up whatever he grew. On Sundays, the kids and grandkids would come over for dinner, and this old house would fill up with noise and laughter. I thought we'd grow old together, sitting side by side in our rocking chairs, watching the sunset. I never imagined anything could come between us. Shows what I know, I guess. It all started with something my sister Doris said at a family gathering. She kept looking at Tom funny, then pulled me aside and whispered, "Ruth, don't you think Tom looks an awful lot like your daddy did? Same eyes, same way of walking?" I laughed it off, told her she was being silly. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about old photographs of my father as a young man, comparing them in my mind to Tom's face. And something cold settled in my stomach. A fear I couldn't name. Little did I know that question would lead me down a path I never wanted to walk, to a truth so terrible it would change everything I thought I knew about my life. If you're sitting there wondering what happened next, make sure to follow along. This old woman's got a story that'll make you think twice about digging up the past. That comment from my sister Doris lit a fire in my mind that just wouldn't die down, no matter how I tried to smother it. You know how sometimes a thought gets stuck in your head like a splinter? That's what happened to me. I'd be doing something ordinary, folding laundry or watering my African violets, when suddenly I'd remember what she said about Tom looking like my daddy. I started watching Tom real careful-like. Things I never paid much mind to before suddenly seemed important. The way he'd tilt his head when he was listening. How his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The habit he had of tapping his fingers on the table when he was thinking hard about something. And Lord help me, I could see it. I could see my daddy in him. Now, my daddy passed when I was just 17. He was a good man, worked hard at the paper mill all his life to keep food on our table. Mama was devoted to him, or at least, that's what I always believed. After he died, she never so much as looked at another man. She just raised us kids, and later helped with my children when I needed it. I pulled out the old photo albums one afternoon when Tom was at his weekly domino game with the fellas from church. My hands were shaking something terrible as I turned those pages, looking at the faded pictures of my father. There he was, standing proud in his Sunday best, arm around my mama. I traced his face with my finger, then closed my eyes and pictured Tom. The resemblance hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a passing similarity. It was like looking at the same man in different stages of life. This is crazy talk, I told myself, snapping the album shut. You're letting Doris get in your head with her foolishness. But I couldn't shake it. And once that seed of doubt was planted, other things started cropping up too. Like how my mama acted strange when Tom first came around. She got all quiet and pale when I introduced them, claiming she had one of her headaches coming on. At the time, I figured she was just being protective, worried about me getting hurt again after my divorce. But now I wondered if there was something more to it. Or how about the time my cousin Betty, who's known for speaking her mind even when nobody asks for it, commented at our wedding reception. "It's downright eerie how much your new husband reminds me of Uncle Frank. Got the same laugh and everything." These memories kept bubbling up, things I hadn't given a second thought to at the time. But now they formed a pattern that scared me half to death. I didn't know what to do with these thoughts. Couldn't exactly bring them up at dinner, could I? "Pass the potatoes, dear. And by the way, is there any chance you might be my long-lost brother?" The very idea made me sick to my stomach, so I did what I've always done when troubled. I went to see my mama. She's 85 now, living in that little assisted living place across town. Her mind wanders sometimes, but mostly she's still sharp as a tack. I brought her some of those butter cookies she loves, and a new cardigan, since that place is always cold as a meat locker. We chatted about this and that. Her new neighbor with the loud TV. My youngest granddaughter losing her first tooth. Normal things. Safe things. Then, with my heart pounding so hard I was sure she could hear it, I said, "Mama, I was looking at some old pictures of Daddy yesterday." She smiled, that soft smile she always gets when he's mentioned. "Your father was a handsome man." "Yes, he was," I agreed, gathering my courage. "You know, it's funny. A few people have mentioned that Tom reminds them of Daddy." The change in her was instant and alarming. The color drained from her face, and her hands, those hands that had always been so steady, even in the worst of times, began to tremble. She knocked over her teacup, spilling the contents across the little table between us. "Clumsy me," she muttered, refusing to meet my eyes as I helped clean up the mess. When we settled back down, she changed the subject so fast it gave me whiplash, asking about my flower garden and whether I'd put in my tomatoes yet. But I'd seen her reaction, and it confirmed my worst fears. There was something there, something she didn't want to talk about. I left her place more troubled than when I arrived. On the drive home, I had to pull over because I was crying so hard I couldn't see the road. What was I supposed to do with this? How could I even begin to find out if what I suspected was true? That night, I barely slept a wink. Tom snored peacefully beside me, unaware that his wife was lying there, wondering if our entire marriage was built on a terrible mistake. I studied his profile in the darkness, this man I'd loved for 30 years, and felt like I was looking at a stranger. The next morning, I made a decision. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I couldn't live with this question eating away at me day and night, so I did something I never thought I'd do. While Tom was in the shower, I plucked a few of his hairs from his hairbrush. Then I found an old envelope with a birthday card my mama had sent me, hoping her saliva on the seal would be enough. It felt wrong, sneaking around like this, but I was desperate for answers. If you've ever faced a moment where you knew learning the truth might destroy everything you hold dear, then you understand what I was feeling. Sometimes I wonder how different my life would be if I'd just let sleeping dogs lie. But that's not how my story went. If you're finding any comfort or wisdom in this old woman's tale, I hope you'll stick with me. There's plenty more to tell, and the hardest parts are still to come. Sometimes sharing our burdens makes them a little lighter to bear. Getting those DNA tests done wasn't as simple as they make it look on TV. I had to do some research at the library since I don't have one of those fancy computers at home. The librarian, Miss Jenkins, sweet young thing with purple hair, if you can believe it, helped me find a place that would do what I needed without asking too many questions. It cost nearly all the money I'd been saving in my Christmas fund, but some things are worth more than presents. I mailed off those samples with hands shaking so bad I could hardly seal the envelope. Then came the waiting. Lord have mercy, the waiting nearly drove me out of my mind. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. I jumped every time the phone rang. I checked the mailbox 3 times a day. Tom noticed something was off, of course. After 30 years together, you can't hide much from your spouse. "You feeling all right, Ruthie?" he'd ask, concern in those familiar eyes. "You seem jumpy as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." I'd make up excuses, worried about my blood pressure, thinking about my garden, fretting over the grandkids. I hated lying to him. Each fib was like a small betrayal, adding to the weight on my shoulders. But how could I tell him the truth when I didn't even know what it was myself? During those long days of waiting, I tried to prepare myself for whatever answer might come. If the test showed no relation, I'd thank the good Lord above and never breathe a word of my foolish suspicions to anyone. We'd go on with our lives, and I'd consider it a lesson in not letting idle gossip take root. But if it showed what I feared, well, I couldn't even bring myself to think that through completely. The very idea made me physically ill. One morning, Tom found me throwing up in the bathroom, my body rebelling against the terrible thoughts in my head. "That's it," he said, helping me clean up. "I'm taking you to Dr. Miller today. No arguments." I managed to talk him out of it, claiming it was just something I ate. But I was walking a tightrope, and I knew it couldn't last much longer. The results came on a Tuesday. I remember because it was my day to volunteer at the church food pantry. The envelope was there when I got home, innocent-looking as could be, but to me it might as well have been a snake ready to strike. I sat at the kitchen table, that envelope burning a hole in my purse while I tried to work up the courage to open it. The ticking of the old wall clock seemed unnaturally loud. Through the window, I could see Tom in his garden, kneeling in the dirt as he planted his summer beans. He looked so peaceful, so content. My heart ached watching him, knowing I might be about to destroy everything. Finally, I took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and opened the envelope. I've lived through some hard times in my life. I buried my daddy when I was still a teenager. I weathered a painful divorce when my first husband ran off with a woman half my age. I sat by my brother's hospital bed when cancer was eating him alive. But nothing prepared me for the words on that paper. The test confirmed it. Tom and I shared enough DNA to be half-siblings. My husband was my brother. The room started spinning, and I thought I might faint dead away. Somehow I made it to the bathroom just in time to be violently sick. Afterward, I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the tub, and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. Great, heaving sobs that felt like they were tearing me apart from the inside. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that Tom came looking for me, knocking gently on the door. "Ruth, you okay in there, honey?" His voice, that voice I'd loved for 30 years, now sounded different to my ears. I couldn't answer him, couldn't face him, not yet. "Just a stomach bug," I managed to choke out. "Don't come in, might be catching." He hesitated, then said he'd make me some tea with honey. Always taking care of me, always so kind. How could this be happening? When I finally pulled myself together enough to leave the bathroom, I hid the test results in my Bible, the one place I knew Tom would never look. Then I went through the motions of being sick with a virus, letting him fuss over me while my mind raced with terrible questions. How could this have happened? Had my mama known all along? Had she given up a baby for adoption years ago, before I was born? Or was it more complicated than that? And the worst question of all? Did Tom know? No, I couldn't believe that. The man I knew wouldn't have hidden something like this. The shock on his face when I told him would be real. I was sure of it, which meant I was carrying this burden alone, at least for now. That night, lying beside him in the dark, listening to his familiar breathing, I felt like I was drowning in grief. 30 years of marriage, thousands of kisses, of intimate moments, of shared secrets and dreams. All of it tainted now by this terrible truth. The next morning, I called my friend Judith. If you're following along with my story, you should know that Judith has been my rock since high school. We've seen each other through every up and down life could throw at us. If anyone would know what to do, it would be her. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, though Tom had already left for his morning walk. "It's important, Judith. It's the worst thing imaginable." We agreed to meet at the diner on the edge of town, the one where nobody we knew ever went. As I hung up the phone, I noticed my hands had finally stopped shaking. In their place was a strange, cold numbness spreading through me. I had to face facts. My life as I knew it was over. Now I just had to figure out what came next. If you've ever had the ground fall out from under you, if you've ever discovered that something you believed with all your heart wasn't true, then maybe you understand a fraction of what I was feeling. Stay with me as I tell you what happened next. Sometimes the only way out is through. Meeting Judith at that out-of-the-way diner was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because I needed someone to talk to before I lost my mind completely. A curse because saying those awful words out loud made them real in a way they hadn't been before. We sat in a booth at the very back, nursing cups of coffee that neither of us was drinking. Judith took one look at my face and knew this wasn't about some ordinary trouble. "Ruth," she said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together, just like we always have." The words came out in fits and starts, my voice barely above a whisper. I told her everything. The comments about Tom's resemblance to my daddy, my mama's strange reaction, the DNA test that confirmed my worst fears. By the time I finished, tears were streaming down both our faces. "Sweet Lord above," Judith whispered, squeezing my hand so tight it hurt. "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do with this terrible knowledge? "I need to talk to Mama," I said finally. "I need to understand how this happened." Judith nodded slowly. "Do you want me to come with you?" Part of me wanted to say yes, to have her steady presence beside me. But I knew this was something I needed to do alone. "No," I said. "But thank you for offering. This is between me and Mama." We sat there a while longer, trying to make sense of something that defied understanding. Before we parted, Judith hugged me tight and whispered, "Whatever happens, I'm here. You're not alone in this." Those words were a lifeline in the dark days that followed. I waited until Saturday to visit Mama. I needed time to gather my courage, to think about what I would say. How do you ask your 85-year-old mother if she gave up a baby for adoption? How do you ask if that baby grew up to be the man you married? I didn't sleep a wink the night before. Tom noticed my distraction, of course. He's always been attuned to my moods, one of the things I've loved most about him. Now that sensitivity felt like another twist of the knife. "Everything all right, Ruthie?" he asked as we got ready for bed. "You've been awful quiet these past few days." "Just worried about Mama," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Thought I'd go see her tomorrow." He nodded, accepting this without question. "Give her my love," he said, kissing my forehead like he'd done thousands of times before. I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, wondering how many more nights we had left like this. How do you end a 30-year marriage? How do you tell the person you love most in the world that you can never be together again? The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of spring day that usually lifts my spirits. But there was no joy in me as I drove to the assisted living facility. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, I was falling apart. Mama was having a good day. Her eyes were clear, and she smiled when I walked in. She was sitting by the window, working on a crossword puzzle, something she's always loved. "Ruth," she said, putting down her pencil. "What a nice surprise. Is Tom with you?" The mention of his name nearly broke me. "No, Mama. It's just me today." I sat down across from her, trying to find the words to begin this impossible conversation. She must have sensed something was wrong because her smile faded. "What is it, baby? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I had. The ghost of a past she'd kept hidden from me my whole life. "Mama," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." She went very still, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. "Did you?" My voice caught, but I forced myself to continue. "Did you have another baby? Before me?" The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. She closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "How did you find out?" she whispered. The room seemed to tilt around me. Even though I'd suspected, even though the DNA test had confirmed it, hearing her admission made my stomach drop like I was on a carnival ride gone wrong. "It's Tom, isn't it?" I said, the words burning my throat. "The baby you gave up. It's Tom." She nodded, a tiny movement that changed my world forever. "I didn't know," she said, her voice trembling. "Not at first. When you brought him home that day, I nearly collapsed. He looked so much like your father, like my Frank. But I told myself it was just a coincidence. There was no way it could be him." "But you knew," I said, anger rising in me now. "Eventually, you knew for sure." She looked down at her hands, spotted with age now, but still familiar. The hands that had comforted me, cooked for me, held me through every hard time in my life. "Yes," she admitted softly, After a while, I knew. And you said nothing. It wasn't a question. What was I supposed to say, Ruth? You were so happy. I'd never seen you so happy, not since before your divorce. How could I take that away from you? By telling me the truth. My voice rose, and I had to make an effort to lower it. By not letting me marry my own brother. The words hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. A nurse passing by glanced in with concern, but I waved her away. Mama was crying now, silent tears tracking down her wrinkled cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry, baby. I made a terrible mistake." "Tell me everything," I demanded. "I deserve to know." And so she did. The story came out in pieces, a painful history I'd never known. How she'd gotten pregnant before she met my father, just 19 and terrified. The father was a boy from her hometown who'd gone off to war and never returned. Her parents had sent her to stay with an aunt in another state until the baby was born. "They made me give him up," she said, her voice hollow with the pain of that long-ago loss. Said no decent man would marry me with another man's baby. Said it was for the best. She'd come home after, met my father, and never told a soul about the baby she'd left behind. Not even my father knew. She'd buried that secret deep and tried to forget, though she admitted she never could. Not completely. "When your father died, I thought about trying to find my first baby," she said. "But I was afraid of what people would say, afraid he wouldn't want anything to do with me. So I let it be, until fate brought him right to her doorstep, as her daughter's new love." As her story unfolded, my anger began to shift. Not disappear. No, I was still furious that she'd kept this from me. But I could see now that she'd been trapped in an impossible situation of her own making. "Does Tom know?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me. "No," she said firmly. "At least, not from me. I never told him." That, at least, was something. Tom was as much a victim in this as I was. If you've ever had to confront a loved one about a painful truth, you know how hard it can be. But stay with me. This isn't the end of my story. Just another difficult chapter in a journey I never expected to take. I left Mama's place that day, feeling like I'd aged 20 years in a single afternoon. The weight of what I now knew pressed down on me so heavy I could barely stand straight. My mama had given up a baby boy for adoption almost 60 years ago. That baby grew up to become Tom. My Tom, the man I'd loved and lived with for 3 decades. The drive home was a blur. I remember stopping at the little chapel by the highway, the one that's always open for travelers. I sat in the back pew for nearly an hour, not really praying, just trying to breathe through the pain. Trying to find some sense in a world that had suddenly lost all meaning. Back home, I sat in the driveway for the longest time, staring at our little house with its peeling white paint and the porch swing Tom had built when we first moved in. How many evenings had we spent on that swing, talking about our day or just sitting in comfortable silence? Now everything was tainted, poisoned by a truth neither of us had known. I couldn't put it off any longer. Tom deserved to know. But Lord have mercy, I didn't know if I had the strength to tell him. He was in the kitchen when I finally went inside, making his famous chicken and dumplings. The smell hit me as soon as I opened the door, warm and comforting, like everything about our life together had been. "There you are," he said, smiling that smile that still made my heart skip a beat even now. Was starting to worry. "How's your mama doing?" I couldn't answer. Just stood there in the doorway, clutching my purse like it was a life preserver, and I was drowning in open water. Tom's smile faded as he looked at me. He set down his spoon and wiped his hands on a dish towel. "Ruth? What's wrong?" "We need to talk," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. Can you come sit down?" He followed me to the living room, concern written all over his face. We sat on the sofa where we'd spent countless evenings watching TV, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting against him. The memories were almost too much to bear. "You're scaring me, Ruthie," he said, taking my hand. "Are you sick? Is it your mama?" I shook my head, searching for words that wouldn't come. How do you tell someone something like this? There's no gentle way, no kind approach. "Tom," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I found out something today. Something terrible." His hand tightened around mine. Whatever it is, we'll face it together, just like always. Those words nearly broke me, because this was the one thing we couldn't face together. This was the thing that would tear us apart forever. I've been noticing things, I began haltingly. People commenting on how much you look like my daddy. It got me thinking, got me worried, so I did something I shouldn't have. I got some of your hair and something with Mama's DNA on it, and I had a test done. Confusion clouded his face. A test? What kind of test? I took a deep breath. A DNA test, Tom, to see if you and Mama are related. He stared at me, not understanding at first. Then slowly, horribly, I watched comprehension dawn in his eyes. That's crazy, he said, pulling his hand away. Why would you even think such a thing? Because you look so much like my daddy, I said, tears filling my eyes. Because Mama acted so strange when she first met you. Because too many people have noticed the resemblance over the years. That doesn't mean anything. His voice was rising now, fear and anger mixing together. Lots of people look alike. It doesn't mean that I'm... He couldn't even say it. Neither could I. But it hung in the air between us, this unspeakable truth. The test came back, I said softly. It shows that you and Mama share DNA. That she's your mother, Tom. He stood up so quickly the coffee table skidded across the floor. No, that's not possible. My parents were John and Elizabeth Harper. They raised me in Millfield. I have their pictures, their birth certificates. They adopted you, I said, the words tearing at my throat. Mama told me everything today. She had a baby before she met my daddy. She was young and scared, and her parents made her give him up. That baby was you, Tom. He was shaking his head, backing away from me like I was something dangerous. You're wrong. The test is wrong. This is insane. I wish it was, I whispered. God knows I wish it was. Tom turned away from me, bracing himself against the wall. His shoulders were shaking, and I realized he was crying. In 30 years of marriage, I'd only seen him cry twice, when his adopted mother died and when our first grandchild was born. Now he was breaking apart before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to help him. If this is true, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, then you and we're siblings, I said, the word like ashes in my mouth. Half-siblings. He made a sound then, something between a moan and a sob, that I'll never forget as long as I live. It was the sound of a heart shattering, of a life falling to pieces. We sat in terrible silence for what felt like hours. The chicken and dumplings burned on the stove, filling the house with acrid smoke, but neither of us moved to turn off the burner. Such a small thing, dinner ruined, when our entire life together had just gone up in flames. What do we do now? Tom finally asked, his voice hollow. That was the question I'd been asking myself since I first saw those test results. What do we do now? How do we go forward from here? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know how to undo 30 years or how to stop loving you the way I have for so long. But we can't. He couldn't finish the sentence. No, I agreed. We can't. That night was the first in 30 years that we slept apart. Tom took a blanket to the couch, and I lay alone in our bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was adrift in space with nothing to anchor me. The next few days were a blur of pain and awkwardness. We moved around each other like ghosts, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy while knowing nothing would ever be normal again. We didn't touch. We barely spoke. The distance between us, physically just a few feet, felt like an unbridgeable chasm. If you've ever had your whole world pulled out from under you in an instant, you know there's no guidebook for navigating that kind of pain. All you can do is take one breath after another and hope somehow you'll find your way through. I wish I could tell you that there was some easy solution, some way to fix what had been broken. But real life isn't like those stories in books or on TV. Sometimes there are wounds that never fully heal, truths that can't be undone no matter how much we might wish it. This journey of mine was far from over. The hardest parts were still to come, facing our children, our friends, deciding what our future would look like now that our past had been rewritten so cruelly. If you're still with me, I thank you for listening to an old woman's heartbreak. Sometimes sharing our burdens makes them a little lighter to bear. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Harder than when I lost my daddy, harder than my first divorce, harder even than watching my brother waste away from cancer. This was a different kind of pain altogether, one that came with shame, confusion, and a grief so deep it felt like drowning. Tom and I tried at first to keep up appearances. We still lived in the same house, still ate meals at the same table, but everything had changed. There was a wall between us now, built of knowledge we wished we'd never gained. Every accidental touch, every familiar gesture that had once brought comfort, now made us both flinch and pull away. We had to tell the children, of course. That was a conversation I dreaded more than anything. How do you explain something like this to your grown kids? To your grandchildren? We decided to tell my two children first, James and Sarah. Tom had never had children of his own before meeting me, which now made a terrible kind of sense. We asked them to come over one Sunday afternoon, without their spouses or kids. They knew something was wrong the minute they walked in. Parents can't hide much from their children, no matter how old everyone gets. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked, her eyes darting between me and Tom. "You look awful, both of you." We sat them down in the living room, the same place where I'd told Tom the truth just weeks before. The words came out haltingly, neither of us quite able to look our children in the eye as we explained. Their reactions were about what you'd expect: disbelief, shock, horror. James got up and walked out of the room at one point, returning with red-rimmed eyes. Sarah just sat there, shaking her head slowly, as if by denying it she could make it untrue. "So, you two are siblings?" James finally said, the word hanging in the air like something poisonous. "Half-siblings," I clarified, though it hardly mattered. "We share a mother." "And you never knew?" Sarah asked, looking at Tom. "You never suspected?" Tom shook his head, his face gray with exhaustion. "I was told my birth mother died when I was born. The Harpers, the people who raised me, they never said anything different." "What are you going to do?" James asked, the practical one as always. "Are you going to stay together?" Tom and I exchanged a glance. We hadn't actually discussed it out loud yet, though we both knew the answer. "No," I said quietly. "We can't. It wouldn't be right." The words felt like stones in my mouth, heavy and cold. 30 years of marriage ended by a truth that had been there all along, hidden just beneath the surface of our lives. Telling the rest of the family wasn't any easier. Word spread quickly, as it always does in small towns. I could feel the whispers when I went to the grocery store, see the sidelong glances at church. Some people were kind, offering awkward condolences like we'd suffered a death. Others kept their distance, as if what had happened to us might somehow be catching. Through it all, Judith stood by me. She came by almost every day, bringing food or just sitting with me while I cried. She never judged, never said, "I told you so," about the DNA test. She just listened and held my hand and reminded me that I wasn't alone. My mama was suffering too. The secret she'd kept for so many years was now out in the open, exposing her to the judgment of everyone who knew her. Some of the other residents at the assisted living facility stopped sitting with her at meals. The shame she'd feared all those decades ago had finally caught up with her. I visited her as often as I could, though it was hard. Part of me was still angry at her for not telling me the truth sooner, for letting this tragedy unfold when she could have prevented it. But another part understood the impossible position she'd been in. And she was still my mama. "I never meant to hurt you," she told me during one visit, her voice thin and fragile. "Either of you. I thought I was doing the right thing by staying quiet." "I know, Mama," I said, though the words stuck in my throat. "I know you didn't do it on purpose." Forgiveness is a complicated thing. It doesn't come all at once like flipping a switch. It comes in fits and starts, in small moments when you choose compassion over anger. I was trying to forgive her, but it was a daily struggle. Meanwhile, Tom and I had to figure out what came next. We couldn't keep living together, that much was clear. But untangling 30 years of shared life isn't simple. We owned the house together. Our finances were completely merged. Most of our friends were mutual. Even our favorite coffee mugs sat side by side in the kitchen cabinet. "I'll move out," Tom said one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, papers spread between us. "You should keep the house." "Where will you go?" I asked, hating how formal we'd become with each other, like strangers negotiating a business deal instead of two people who had shared a bed, a life, a heart. "My buddy Mike has a rental property on the edge of town, says I can stay there for a while until I figure things out." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The thought of Tom living somewhere else, waking up without him every morning, was almost unbearable. But the alternative was worse, continuing to live in this painful limbo, neither husband and wife nor brother and sister, just two people caught in a tragedy not of their making. We decided to tell everyone we were separating, but kept the real reason between us and the immediate family. As far as the rest of the world was concerned, we'd simply grown apart. It was easier that way, saved us from the worst of the gossip and judgment. The day Tom moved out was gray and drizzly, fitting my mood perfectly. I stood in the doorway, watching as he loaded the last of his things into his pickup truck. Just a few boxes and suitcases. We'd agreed he would take only what he needed for now, and we'd figure out the rest later. He paused before getting in the truck, looking back at the house we'd shared for so many years. At me, standing there trying not to fall apart completely. "I don't know how to say goodbye to you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then don't," I replied. "This isn't goodbye. It's just different." He nodded, understanding what I couldn't quite put into words. We would always be in each other's lives somehow. The love we shared for 30 years couldn't simply vanish, even if it had to change shape. As his truck disappeared down the road, I felt something inside me break free. Not healing, that would take much longer, but a first step toward whatever came next. I was 62 years old, starting over again in a way I never could have imagined. That night, alone in the too quiet house, I pulled out an old photo album and let myself remember. The good years, the happy times, the life we'd built together. I cried until I had no tears left, mourning what was lost while trying to find gratitude for what we'd had, however complicated it now seemed. If you're walking a difficult path right now, if life has thrown you a curve you never saw coming, know that you're not alone. We all face battles that seem impossible to win, but somehow we keep putting one foot in front of the other. We keep breathing, keep moving forward. It's all we can do. Folks say time heals all wounds, but they don't tell you how slow that healing can be. Those first months after Tom moved out were some of the loneliest I've ever known. The house felt too big, too quiet, filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. I'd catch myself calling out to him when I heard a noise, or turning to tell him something about my day, only to remember he wasn't there anymore. Sleep was hardest. After 30 years of sharing a bed with someone, their breathing becoming as familiar as your own, that empty space beside you feels like a physical ache. I took to sleeping on the couch most nights. Couldn't bear to lie in that big bed alone with all those memories. My children worried about me something fierce. They'd stop by unannounced, bringing food I hardly touched, or suggesting activities I had no interest in. I appreciated their concern, but there wasn't much they could do to fix what was broken inside me. "Mom, you need to get out of the house," Sarah would say, picking up dishes that had sat unwashed for days. "This isn't healthy." She was right, of course. I was letting grief swallow me whole. But knowing something and doing something about it are two different matters entirely. It was Judith who finally dragged me back into the land of the living. She showed up one morning in October, about 3 months after Tom left, and found me still in my housecoat at noon, staring blankly at a TV that wasn't even turned on. "That's enough," she said, hands on her hips like she was scolding one of her grandchildren. "Get dressed. We're going out." "I don't feel like it," I mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "Didn't ask if you felt like it," she replied, already rummaging through my closet. "Ruth Ann Miller, I have known you since we were both skinny little things with pigtails. I stood by you through your daddy's funeral, through your divorce, through everything life's thrown at you. And I'm not about to stand by and watch you waste away in this house. There's something about a friend who's known you your whole life. They can get away with saying things nobody else could. I let her bully me into a shower and clean clothes, too tired to argue. She took me to the community center, where they were starting a class on quilting. I've always been handy with a needle, though I hadn't done much sewing since all this happened. The room was full of women, some I knew from church or around town, others strangers. They all smiled and welcomed me like nothing was wrong, like I was just another person joining their group, instead of the woman at the center of the biggest scandal our small town had seen in decades. That first day, I just sat quietly in the corner, working on a simple square pattern while conversations flowed around me. But being among people again, focusing on something with my hands, it helped. Just a little, but it was more relief than I'd felt in months. I went back the next week, and the week after that. Slowly, the fog of grief began to lift. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but I was functioning again. Started taking care of my house, cooking actual meals instead of just making toast when hunger got too bad to ignore. Started talking to my neighbors again instead of hurrying inside when I saw them coming. One day in late November, I ran into Tom at the grocery store. It was bound to happen eventually in a town our size, but it still knocked the wind right out of me. He looked thinner, older, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. But he smiled when he saw me. A sad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hello, Ruth," he said, his voice so familiar it made my heart ache. "Tom," I managed to reply. "How are you doing?" Such a simple question, but loaded with so much meaning between us. "Taking it day by day," he said. "You?" "Same," I nodded. "Just same." We stood there awkwardly in the cereal aisle, shopping carts between us like a barrier. There was so much I wanted to say, so many questions I wanted to ask, but none of it seemed right for this moment, this place. "I started quilting," I blurted out, desperate to fill the silence. "At the community center." His face softened. "That's good. You always did have a talent for it." "And you? What have you been doing?" He shrugged. "Mike got me helping with his boat restoration. Keeps my hands busy, my mind occupied." Another awkward silence fell. Around us, other shoppers pushed their carts, oblivious to the current of emotion running between the two people standing still in their midst. "Well, I should—" I gestured vaguely toward the rest of the store. "Yeah, me too," he said. "It was good to see you, Ruth." "You too," I replied, meaning it despite the pain. I watched him walk away, the familiar set of his shoulders, the slight limp from that old football injury. The man I'd loved for 30 years, now someone I had to learn to love differently. That brief meeting shook me more than I expected. I went home and cried for hours, releasing feelings I thought I'd already worked through. Grief isn't a straight line. It doubles back on you just when you think you're making progress. But somehow, seeing Tom also gave me a strange sort of peace. He was surviving. So was I. We were finding our way forward, separately, but still connected by everything we'd shared. As Christmas approached, I faced another hurdle: the holidays without Tom. For 3 decades, we'd established traditions together: the way we decorated the tree, the special breakfast I made on Christmas morning, the drive around town to see the lights on Christmas Eve. Doing those things alone felt impossible. So I didn't try. Instead, I accepted Sarah's invitation to spend Christmas at her house with her husband and kids. It was different, sometimes painfully so. But there were moments of joy too, watching my grandchildren tear into presents, helping Sarah make her first ever turkey dinner, singing carols around the piano with people I loved. Tom spent the holiday with James and his family, an arrangement we'd worked out through the kids. It wasn't ideal, having to divide up the family this way, but we were all trying our best to create a new normal. The new year came, bringing with it a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't over it. Don't think I ever will be completely. But I was learning to carry the pain differently, to make space for other feelings alongside it. I even started going back to church, though I switched to the early service to avoid running into most of the gossips. My faith had been shaken by everything that happened. I'd spent many nights angry at God, questioning why he would allow such a cruel twist of fate. But in the quiet of that little church, with sunlight streaming through the stained glass and familiar hymns washing over me, I found a measure of comfort. Pastor Dave, bless his heart, never pushed or pried. He just welcomed me back with a gentle handshake and an offer. "My door is always open if you want to talk." I wasn't ready yet, but it was good to know the offer was there. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and with it came a sense of renewal. I planted a garden for the first time since Tom left. Nothing fancy, just some tomatoes and peppers and a few flowers to brighten the yard. Getting my hands in the dirt felt right somehow, connecting me to the rhythm of growth and change that continues no matter what chaos we humans create in our lives. If you're going through hard times right now, remember that healing isn't about forgetting or getting over it. It's about learning to live alongside your pain, to make room for joy even when grief is still present. Take it from someone who's been there. The human heart has an amazing capacity to hold seemingly contradictory feelings all at once. By the time summer rolled around, I'd found a kind of rhythm to my new life. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet acceptance that carried me from one day to the next. My quilting group had become an unexpected lifeline. Those ladies never asked prying questions, just welcomed me into their circle with open arms and kept my hands busy with beautiful work. I'd even started having Sunday dinners at my house again, with James and Sarah taking turns bringing their families over. It wasn't the same without Tom there, but it filled the house with noise and laughter, pushing back against the silence that had threatened to swallow me whole those first few months. Tom and I had settled into a careful kind of friendship. We'd see each other at family gatherings, birthdays, graduations, special occasions we couldn't miss, and manage polite conversation. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me across the room with such sadness in his eyes that it took my breath away. I imagine I looked at him the same way. It was at our grandson Kevin's high school graduation party that something shifted between us. The celebration was at James's house, the backyard filled with folding tables and balloons. I was helping in the kitchen when Tom arrived, and we found ourselves alone for a moment. "That potato salad looks familiar," he said, nodding at the bowl I was carrying. "Your favorite recipe," I replied, before I could think better of it. "Force of habit, I guess." He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. Some habits are worth keeping. It was such a small moment, but something eased between us. Later, as family and friends mingled in the yard, we found ourselves sitting at the same table, talking not just about the kids or grandkids, but about ourselves. He told me about the boat he was helping restore, and I told him about my quilting projects. Simple things, normal things, but it felt like crossing a bridge I'd thought was burned forever. "Would you like to see the boat sometime?" he asked, as the party was winding down. "Mike and I have got her looking pretty good." I hesitated only a moment. "I'd like that." The following weekend, he picked me up in his truck, not coming inside, just waiting at the curb like a gentleman caller. It felt strange getting into the passenger seat, a place I'd sat thousands of times before, but now seemed new and unfamiliar. The boat was at the small marina by the lake outside town. It wasn't fancy, just an old wooden fishing boat that Tom and his friend had sanded down and refinished, replacing rotten boards and giving it a fresh coat of paint. But the pride in Tom's voice as he showed me around was something I hadn't heard in a long time. "She's still got some work needed," he explained, running his hand along the newly varnished gunnel. "But she'll be ready for the water by end of summer." "It's beautiful work," I said, meaning it. Tom had always been good with his hands, patient with detailed projects in a way I never was. We walked along the dock afterward, the summer sun warm on our shoulders. It felt almost normal, being together like this, until I remembered it couldn't be normal again. Not ever. "I miss you, Ruth," he said suddenly, stopping to look out at the water. Not just as my wife. I miss talking to you, sharing things with you. You were my best friend for 30 years. The simple honesty of it brought tears to my eyes. "I miss you too. Do you think—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Do you think we could be friends again? Real friends, not just pretending for the family's sake?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I'd like to try," I finally said. "It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is," he replied. A phrase he'd said so many times over the years, it made my heart ache with familiarity. From that day, something new began growing between us. Not the love we'd had before. That was gone, transformed by knowledge we couldn't unlearn. But something else, something built on all those years of knowing each other's minds, of shared history and understanding. We started meeting once a week for coffee at the diner on the edge of town. Neutral ground, where we could talk without the weight of our house and all its memories pressing down on us. Sometimes we'd just chat about everyday things, what the grandkids were up to, town gossip, the changing seasons. Other times we'd talk about deeper things, our feelings about what had happened, how we were coping, our fears for the future. I went to see a counselor, Tom told me one rainy afternoon in September. In the city, where nobody knows me. Been going for a couple months now. I was surprised. Tom had always been the type to keep his troubles to himself. Is it helping? I asked. He nodded slowly. Some. Helps to talk to someone who doesn't look at me like I'm part of some terrible tragedy. Someone who just listens. His words stayed with me. The next week, I called and made my own appointment with a counselor. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, admitting I needed help, talking to a stranger about the most painful parts of my life. But Tom was right. It helped to have someone listen without judgment, someone who could offer perspective I couldn't find on my own. Around this time, my mama's health took a turn for the worse. She'd been declining slowly for months, weighed down by age and, I think, by the burden of her secret finally coming to light. I visited her every day, sometimes sitting for hours just holding her hand while she drifted in and out of sleep. I'm sorry, she said during one of her lucid moments. For everything, Ruth. For not being braver when it mattered. I know, Mama, I said, and found I truly meant it. The anger I'd held on to had faded, leaving only compassion for a woman who'd made a terrible mistake and lived with the consequences all her life. She passed peacefully in her sleep one October night. Tom came to the funeral, standing quietly at the back of the church. Afterward, he joined the family at my house, helping serve food and wash dishes like he'd always done. Nobody questioned his presence. Despite everything, he was still family. That evening, after everyone had gone home, he stayed behind to help me clean up. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, falling into the old rhythms we'd established over decades together. Thank you, I said as he was leaving, for being here today. Where else would I be? He replied simply. She was my mother, too. Those words, spoken without bitterness or accusation, brought tears to my eyes. We had found our way to a truth that didn't need to destroy us anymore. The holidays came around again, but this year felt different. Instead of trying to divide the family between us, Tom and I decided to host Christmas dinner together at my house. It raised some eyebrows among the extended family, but our children understood. We weren't trying to go back to the way things were. We were creating something new that honored what we'd been to each other while respecting the boundaries we now needed. Watching Tom carve the turkey at the head of the table, seeing our children and grandchildren all together, I felt a profound gratitude wash over me. This wasn't the life I'd planned or expected, but it was still rich with love and connection. Later, after the dishes were done and the leftovers packed away, Tom and I sat on the porch swing, despite the winter chill. The same swing where we'd spent countless evenings over the years, now holding two people who had traveled through fire together and emerged changed but not destroyed. We did good today, he said, his breath fogging in the cold air. We did, I agreed. Think we can keep doing it? Finding our way forward? He was quiet for a moment, considering. I think so. One day at a time, like we've been doing. One day at a time. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And maybe that's all any of us can really do when life throws something unexpected our way. If you're facing your own impossible situation right now, know that there can be beauty on the other side of pain. Not the same beauty you had before, but something new and precious in its own way. The human heart is remarkably resilient. I've learned that much from this journey of mine. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and I found myself marking the passage of time in new ways. It had been 1.5 years since that terrible day when I first learned the truth, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, life had found a new shape around the broken pieces. Spring came again, bringing with it a sense of renewal I hadn't felt the previous year. My garden expanded beyond the few tomato plants I'd managed before. This time, I put in a proper vegetable patch, plus flower beds bursting with colors that brightened my spirits every time I looked out the window. Tom would come over sometimes to help with the heavier work, tilling the soil, building trellises for the climbing beans, hauling bags of mulch. We'd work side by side in comfortable silence. Two people who knew each other's rhythms so well that words weren't always necessary. "Remember that first garden we planted together?" he asked one warm May afternoon as we took a break on the porch, glasses of sweet tea sweating in our hands. "Right after we moved in here?" I smiled at the memory. Everything died except the zucchini. We had so much zucchini, we were giving it away to anyone who'd take it. "You tried so hard to come up with new ways to cook it," he chuckled. "Zucchini bread, zucchini casserole, zucchini pancakes," I added, laughing at the memory. Those were terrible. These moments of shared reminiscence no longer brought the sharp pain they once had. We had found a way to honor our past without letting it poison our present. It wasn't something I could have imagined possible in those early dark days. My counselor, Dr. Bennett, had a term for what we were doing. "You're reframing your narrative," she explained during one of our sessions. "Finding a way to integrate what happened into your life story without letting it define everything." It sounded fancy, but it made sense. Tom and I weren't trying to forget or pretend away the truth. We were learning to live with it, to carry it alongside all the other truths of our lives. The quilting group continued to be my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of needle and thread, where conversation flowed easily around me without pressure or expectation. Over time, I developed real friendships with several of the women there, particularly a widow named Eleanor, who had moved to town recently to be closer to her daughter. "You should come to book club," Eleanor suggested one day as we worked side by side. "We're reading that new mystery everyone's talking about. Meet Wednesday evenings at the library." A year ago, I would have declined immediately. The thought of putting myself in a new social situation, of facing more curious stares and whispered comments, would have been unbearable. But now I found myself considering it. "I might just do that," I said, surprising myself as much as Eleanor. The book club was another small step forward. Then came volunteering at the food pantry, something Tom and I had always done together before. I went alone now, sorting donations and packing boxes for families in need. The work itself was satisfying, but more than that, it connected me to the community again in a way I had been missing. By summer's end, I realized my calendar had filled up with activities and commitments. I was living again, not just existing. The pain hadn't disappeared. I don't think it ever will completely. But it had become a part of me rather than the whole of me. Tom was finding his own way forward, too. He'd moved from Mike's rental to a small house he bought on the other side of town, a fixer-upper that gave him plenty of projects to occupy his hands and mind. He'd joined a men's group at a different church, made new friends who didn't know our history. We still saw each other regularly, still shared coffee and conversation, still navigated family gatherings together, but we each had our own lives now. It was during a visit to his new place, where I'd come to help him pick paint colors for the living room, that Tom brought up something we'd both been carefully avoiding. "Ruth," he said, setting down the paint samples we'd been comparing, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you about." The serious tone of his voice made me set down my own samples. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about trying to find out more about my birth father. Mama never told us much, just that he was a boy from her hometown who went off to war and never came back." I nodded, remembering the sparse details my mother had shared. "You want to know who he was?" "I do," Tom confirmed. "But I wanted to check with you first. See how you felt about me digging into all that." The consideration touched me deeply. After everything we'd been through, he was still thinking about my feelings, still making sure I was okay before taking this step. "I think you should," I said after a moment. "You deserve to know your full history, Tom. And it doesn't change anything between us. That part is settled." Relief washed over his face. "Thank you. I wasn't sure." "We can't change the past," I said, echoing words Dr. Bennett had told me many times. "But we can choose how we face it." Over the next few months, Tom embarked on his search, spending hours at the library going through old records, contacting the Historical Society in my mother's hometown, even sending away for military archives. I helped when I could, offering what little information I remembered from my own family stories. The search brought us together in a new way, not as husband and wife, not even as brother and sister in any traditional sense, but as two people linked by a shared past, working together to understand it better. When Tom finally found a name and a face to go with it, Robert Anderson, a young soldier who died at Normandy before ever knowing he'd fathered a child, we both felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing. Tom placed the faded photograph of his birth father in a frame on his mantel, next to pictures of the Harpers who had raised him and loved him. "I come from all of them," he told me when I came to see the photo in its place of honor. "The Harpers, Mama, this man I never knew. They're all part of my story." I understood completely. Our lives are shaped by so many forces. Some we choose, others that choose us. The beauty is in accepting it all, the planned and the unexpected, the joyful and the painful. That fall, as the leaves turned and the air grew crisp, I celebrated my 64th birthday. Instead of the quiet dinner I expected, Sarah and James organized a surprise party that brought together everyone who mattered in my life: family, friends from church and quilting group, neighbors who had stood by me through everything, and Tom, of course. He came with a gift wrapped in simple brown paper, a handmade jewelry box crafted from cherry wood with intricate carvings along the edges. Inside was a silver bracelet with a single charm, a quilt square. "For new beginnings," the card read, "and for memories worth keeping." I looked up to find him watching me from across the room, a gentle smile on his face. I nodded my thanks, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. Some gifts mean more than words can express. If you're following along with my story, you might be wondering if there's a happy ending coming. Life isn't that simple, is it? There's no neat bow to tie around experiences like mine. But there is healing and growth and the discovery that joy can coexist with sorrow in this complicated human heart of ours. Here's the next block of the story with about 1,000 words, continuing in the same voice with subtle CTAs. Chapter full circle. 2 years turned into 3, then 4. Life settled into patterns that became familiar, if different from what I'd known before. My house, once so painfully empty after Tom left, now felt like mine in a way it never had when we shared it. I'd rearranged furniture, painted walls, made changes I'd always wanted but never quite got around to. It wasn't about erasing Tom's presence. It was about claiming the space for myself, for this new chapter of my life. I turned 65, then 66. Retirement age, though I'd never had a formal career to retire from. But there was a shift in how I saw myself, a sense of entering a new phase. My grandchildren were growing up fast. Kevin off to college, the younger ones in high school, sprouting up like weeds and developing personalities that sometimes left me marveling at how quickly time passes. Tom and I continued our careful friendship. The awkwardness had faded over time, replaced by a comfortable understanding. We'd found a balance that worked for us: regular coffee meetings, helping each other with projects around our respective houses, sharing family gatherings without tension or strain. We weren't trying to be what we once were to each other, but we weren't pretending that 30 years together had never happened either. It was during one of our coffee meetings, now held at the new cafe downtown rather than the old diner, that Tom brought up something unexpected. "I've been thinking about taking a trip," he said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Going back to Millfield, where I grew up with the Harpers." I looked up, surprised. Tom hadn't been back to his hometown since his adopted parents died, nearly 20 years ago now. "Any particular reason?" "Been doing some soul-searching," he said with a small smile. "Trying to make peace with all the different pieces of who I am. I've learned about my birth parents, made peace with that part of my history. But the Harpers, they raised me, loved me. I want to reconnect with that part of my story, too." I nodded, understanding better than most the need to reconcile the different chapters of one's life. "Sounds like a good idea." He hesitated, turning his coffee cup between his hands. "I was wondering if you might want to come with me." The request caught me off guard. This wasn't just a trip to the hardware store or helping with yard work. This was something deeper, more personal. "Are you sure?" I asked carefully. "I am," he said, meeting my eyes directly. "You're part of my story too, Ruth, a big part. And," he paused, choosing his words with care, "I think I'd value having someone with me who understands everything I've been through. There's no one else who knows all of me the way you do." There was truth in that. For better or worse, Tom and I shared a unique bond, forged through love and pain and the strange, twisted path our lives had taken together. "I'd be honored," I said finally. "When were you thinking of going?" We planned the trip for early spring, when the harsh winter would have passed, but before the summer heat set in. It would be a week-long journey. Millfield was a good day's drive away, and Tom wanted time to visit old haunts, maybe look up childhood friends if any were still around. The night before we were set to leave, I found myself filled with a strange mix of emotions. Excitement, certainly, but also a quiet nervousness. This trip felt significant somehow, like we were turning another corner in our complicated relationship. Sarah stopped by that evening, ostensibly to drop off a casserole for me to take on the trip, but I could tell she had something on her mind. "You sure about this, Mom?" she asked as I put the casserole in the refrigerator. Going away with Tom for a whole week? I understood her concern. In her eyes, this might look like Tom and I were trying to rekindle something that had been painfully put to rest years ago. "It's not what you're thinking," I assured her, sitting down at the kitchen table and motioning for her to join me. "We're not trying to go back to what we were before. That's impossible, and we both know it." "Then what is it?" she asked, the worry still evident in her eyes. I thought carefully about how to explain it. "Tom and I shared 30 years together. That doesn't just disappear, even with everything that happened. We've found a way to be family to each other, not husband and wife, not in the way a brother and sister typically are, but something else. Something that honors what we've been through together." Sarah nodded slowly, though I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "Just be careful, Mom. I don't want to see either of you hurt again." "We will be," I promised, patting her hand. "We've learned a lot about taking care of ourselves and each other in different ways now." The trip itself was a revelation. Traveling with Tom as friends rather than spouses created a different dynamic between us. We shared a car, but had separate hotel rooms. We took turns choosing where to eat and what to see. There was a freedom in it, a lack of the old expectations and patterns that had defined our marriage. Millfield had changed since Tom's childhood, of course, but enough landmarks remained for him to piece together his early years. The house where he grew up with the Harpers was still there, though now painted a different color and with an added sunroom on one side. The current owners, a young couple with 2 small children, were kind enough to let us look around the yard when Tom explained his connection to the place. "My dad built that treehouse," Tom told me, pointing to a weathered wooden structure in the big oak tree. "Spent an entire summer on it. Said every boy needed a place of his own." I watched his face as he reconnected with these memories, saw the blend of joy and melancholy there. The Harpers had given him a good childhood, a foundation of love and security. Learning about his birth parents hadn't changed that truth. We visited the local cemetery where Tom's adopted parents were buried, bringing flowers and spending a quiet hour there. Tom introduced me at their graveside, speaking aloud as if they could hear him. "This is Ruth," he said simply. "She's been an important part of my life for a long time now. I think you would have liked her." The gesture moved me deeply. Despite everything that had happened, Tom was acknowledging the place I held in his life, the history we shared. Not erasing it or pretending it away, but accepting it as part of the complex tapestry of his existence. On our last night in Millfield, we had dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, the food delicious. Over tiramisu and coffee, Tom reached across the table and took my hand briefly. "Thank you for coming with me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's meant more than I can say, having you here for this." "I'm glad I came," I replied honestly. "It's helped me understand you better, seeing where you came from, the people and places that shaped you." We drove home the next day, the car filled with a comfortable quiet. Something had shifted between us during that week away, a deepening of the friendship we'd been carefully building. We weren't trying to recreate what we'd lost. That would have been impossible and unhealthy. Instead, we were forging something new from the ashes of our shared past. When he dropped me off at my house, Tom carried my bags to the door, like the gentleman he'd always been. "We should do that again sometime," he said as he was leaving. "Not Millfield necessarily, but a trip somewhere. Maybe to the coast this summer?" I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with romantic love, but everything to do with genuine affection and respect. "I'd like that. If you're still with me on this journey, bless your heart for listening to an old woman's story. Life rarely gives us the neat endings we see in movies or read in books. Instead, it offers us the chance to write new chapters, even when we think the story is over. That's the beauty of it, I suppose. As long as we're breathing, the page hasn't turned for the last time.